The holidays are coming to an end and it's time to take a look at the very best warbands for beginners who are looking to jump into Warcry in 2024. Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. Happy holidays, happy new year, hope you all had a great time. Warcry is a game that does appear to be growing. It received a lot of support in the latter half of 2023 specifically, and frankly my comment section is loaded with new players, and even the tournament scene is growing, and all of this is awesome to see. But with the influx of new players into the hobby, where do they start? What warbands are just great to pick up and learn the ins and outs of Warcry? Or just have a good time? I am going to go over a variety of warbands that, to me, allow new players to get a taste of Warcry, whether that be bespoke or compendium. But before we get into all of that, please consider hitting like, comment and subscribe to help me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. And if you want to help in a more tangible way, then consider signing up to my Patreon or my YouTube members. Like all of these awesome people on screen now, you gain access to behind the scenes content, giveaways and more. But with all of that out of the way, let's get on with the video.
And now for something completely different.
You better believe I am going to define best before going any further. Like everything, this is all subjective, but laying down the foundation of my opinion should help iron out any confusion. For me, when it comes to best beginner warbands, you have to hit some key pillars. Firstly, you've just got to be good. Not all warbands are good on the tabletop, so the naff have to get axed right away and they will not be appearing here. Secondly, you've just got to be straightforward, nothing too complex or atypical. Thirdly, you got to appeal to people who want to be Unga or people who want to big think. You can't often do both, so this list will have a mix of raw Unga and some things that will interact with the nuances of the game a bit more. And the game just has to be quick to teach. Tutorial games are a thing and these warbands are ideal for these games. And then finally, cost. For newbies, cost is usually a massive factor. This is a huge consideration for compendium factions specifically, which don't just have a quick easy to buy £35 box. And remember, all of this is for a little bit of fun, and with 40 plus warbands in Warcry, I simply can't cover them all, so drop a comment with your go-to beginner faction down below. Also, this just isn't definitive. If you want to play something because it looks cool, go for it. Rule of cool trumps most things, so I get it. You play your Tarantulas brood and have an absolute blast. With all of that bookkeeping out of the way, let's have a look at the list. These are in no particular order. Iron Golems are up first, and that's for one simple reason. These are super straightforward. Iron Golems bring a lot to the table whilst also requiring very little from the old calcium cage. These guys range from fairly tough to actually quite a nuisance, whilst also maintaining a pretty nippy movement profile for the most part. They have access to some very points efficient models, letting them bring a lot of stats, whilst also bringing a fair few models. Their playstyle is super simple too. These guys move up, stand on things, and then they just hit stuff. And since they have access to some amazing hitters, they can hit stuff so hard they get launched into the sun. Looking at their box, these guys have a very respectable leader, 4 incredibly solid mid-range troops, very efficient toughness 5 chaff, and of course access to a frickin' ogre breacher. I'm purposely glossing over a lot here because I don't want to go into big teach mode. Check out my Iron Golems video if you want more of an in-depth look, but let's take a moment to appreciate the breacher specifically. This dude has 30 wounds, toughness 5, and a 3-6-4-8 offensive profile. He's quite simply beautiful. And because he exists in this list, the Iron Golems can afford to make mistakes. He is a battering ram that you launch at things and then you watch as everything dies around you. He's just a lot of fun to mess around with because he is simply so gosh darn strong. The final cherry is their abilities, which are mostly meh. This might initially seem like a bad thing, but not everyone can or wants to absorb a massive array of powerful abilities, and then be able to take all that in on the fly. Iron Golems like the Universals, they like Rush, Onslaught and Rampage. It makes them super easy to teach and prevents the game from being bogged down with analysis paralysis. They are super Unga, and that's really, really cool. Let's jump into a compendium faction for now and look at the Undead. For me, if you want to play the Undead and you are brand new to the game, then Ossiarch Bonereapers are the ones for you. They are very powerful, very easy to start, and they're pretty easy to play, at least at a beginner level. But let's get this out of the way first. Most heroes in Ossiarch Bonereapers kinda suck. They're expensive, they don't do all that much, and they end up being a fairly hefty tax. Heck, 3 of them are just kinda bad wizards that don't pull their weight, and even their Bladeborn offering is pretty darn nasty. Thankfully, this does play in our favour. Why? Because the Mortek Hekatos exists and he is great, as in he is very cheap, he does enough to justify his existence, and you can build one from your regular box of dudes, so what's not to like? Moving on from the Hekatos, we have the plain Jane Dandy Randy Mortek Guard. These guys come in 3 flavours, they are all good, and they are all very cheap. Take lots of these to fill out your ranks. They are cheap toughness 4 to toughness 5 10 wound models, and we just love to see it. Heck, the guy with the Great Blade is brutal in combat and is also the cheapest of the bunch, which is awesome. Then we get to our toys. Morghast Harbingers are, in a word, stupid. They are devilishly fast thanks to a built-in movement ability and high base movement, and also fly. They have excellent offensive stats and a lot of bulk. These guys are your hammers. You throw this thing at everything you want dead. They come in 4 variants, and sadly you can't buy them in singles, but a box of 3 isn't bad and lets you experiment with the one you want to use. And Stalkers are in a similar camp. Built-in movement, decent speed, a lot of bulk, and of course excellent offensive stats at a cheaper points cost. These are your brawlers, your bullies, where Harbingers fly in and nuke exposed things. The Stalker scraps in the centre and clears just about everything else. He is especially good at grinding through chaff, and frankly that's all you need to know. Pick up a box of Mortek Guard and a box of Morghasts or Stalkers, or possibly both, and then you're set. Bonereapers just have ease of play on lock, and building your first warband is straightforward as all heck. Then, if you want to get more into the game and the faction, Death have a lot of solid allies, but that is for another video. Untamed Beasts are one of my favourite factions in the whole game. They are one of the few first edition bespoke warbands that could actually be considered good, and this is largely because their box is filled with solid stuff. Their leader is great. They have access to powerful ranged attacks, displacement, action economy manipulation, cheap chaff, and a higher than average move speed. Untamed Beasts offer a very balanced play experience that provides new players with the opportunity to experiment with a lot of the game's systems all at once, whilst not overwhelming them because their core strategy and playstyle is fairly forgiving and straightforward. They also have multiple expansion routes that offer new players who are looking to go deeper the chance to really flex their noggin with cool synergies and focuses. The obvious one is of course going heavy on beasts, so you can push your action economy and damage to the absolute max. Looking at their single box viability, this box has everything you need. Even the bad part of the box, the Prey Takers, are actually fine, and in a beginner sense, they are actually pretty darn solid. Sure, they are squishy, but they pack a lot of punch, which is always fun to play around with. Unlike the Iron Golems, who don't really use their abilities all that much, players who run Untamed Beasts are all about learning tricks. If you're a newbie that likes the big think aspect of games, then these guys are my go-to suggestion most of the time. My second to last entry and the final compendium faction, we have the Maggotkin of Nurgle, more specifically the demons. The core of the Maggotkin are the Plague Bearers. These gooey little bastards are only 50 points, have 10 wounds, toughness 4 and a 3-3-1-4 offensive profile, which is, if I'm being totally honest, a disgusting package of stats. Sure, you are only movement 3, but really who cares? That stat line is incredible. You can quite literally just take 10 of these guys in a list and have the points left over to bring the biggest threats Warcry has to offer. Multiple, even. Before we get to that though, let's look at other strong units to really get a feel for why these things are so darn awesome. It's their wounds. Demons are fairly tough, with most things being toughness 4, but their overall strength comes from their huge stack of wounds. Nurglings are 105 points but have 20 wounds. Beasts of Nurgle, 150 points for 30 wounds. Your basic 90 point leader has 15 wounds, just to name a few. Throw in a solid defensive reaction, faction-wide healing, and cheap movement support, and you have yourself a faction that takes a hit and just keeps on chugging on. Your potential model count ensures if you do take losses, you are still chugging along with board dominance, since very few factions can actually match you here. Then we have things like allies. You could easily squeeze in a Chimera if you wanted, although taking things like Myrmidons and Crushers are just a really good time. Your allies should be there to cover your weaknesses, which is the overall lack of damage. This encourages a very straightforward playstyle of shambling hordes who potter around doing what they need to do, and big stonking clobber factories slapping things into the sun. To get started, you really can just buy a box of Plague Bearers, maybe 2, and then buy fun stuff like Crushers and Myrmidons, and then you're good to go. Finally, we have Chaos Legionnaires, and Chaos Legionnaires are very, very similar to Iron Golems in their newbie-friendly ways, since they are very much mid-range brawlers. Their best unit, the Hornhelm, is pretty darn fantastic to boot. Movement 4, toughness 4, and 18 wounds with a 3-5-2-6 profile for 125 points. That's just nice. And if you want to get a little bit cheaper, your Horn Shields are all toughness 5 with 12 wounds and with decent offensive stats to boot. They like to get in there and lay the smack down and provide a very solid base for ally support, whilst also being fairly powerful straight out of their box. Good raw stats just does that. They also have some nice tricks up their sleeve, even if their tricks are a little bit underwhelming sometimes. For example, the Mutando is really fun and gives you a lot of interesting movement play. The Decuriarch lets you mess around with risk versus reward ranged attacks. Then you have the aesthetics of the models themselves, which are almost universally praised as being pretty darn snazzy, which is always nice. They aren't as fancy as other factions, but their playstyle is straightforward. They can hit things, they can take a hit, they can move, they love a good ally when expanding. Nothing flashy, but all around solid and absolutely perfect for beginners. And that's it, that's the end of the video. Getting started in Warcry is a blast, and I hope this video gave you some ideas on which factions are pretty swell when it comes to jumping in. Of course, there are way more factions than I've talked about here, and maybe you are looking for something else. Let me know down below which factions you would recommend or which factions you started with. Once again, a massive shout out to my amazing patrons and members, and an extra special mention to my algorithmic demon slayers, Armoire Enthusiast 7, Brioche, Head Knight of Paint, Kiplang, Kitty Cowan Prakamakul, Long Run Hobbies, Lord Phylax, Rob, Scully Gaming, and Velas. Until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra.